Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, friends, welcome to all of you here in the Ghetto Museum in Terezin, and also to you who are watching us online. I'd like to wish you a very warm welcome. This year, we reminisce about the tragic and groundbreaking events which went down in the history of our country and the whole of Europe. 80 years ago, the first deportation of Jews from the Czech lands was organized, and the Jewish ghetto here in Terezin was established. The ghetto was an important part of the hideous system of the so-called final solution to the Jewish question. That's how the Nazis called the deadly plan to exterminate European Jews. Ladies and gentlemen, let me wish a hearty welcome to the former prisoners, survivors of the Shoah, and their families. I should also like to welcome Michal Stránsky, the president of the Initiative of Terezin, association bringing together former prisoners. Daniel Hošek, the president of the administrative board of Ghetto Terezin,stadt, research institution and place of remembrance of the history of the ghetto, which also brings together survivors in Israel. Welcome. Mr. Vlastimil Ouroda, Vice Minister for Culture for the Division of Culture, Heritage and State-funded organizations. The Minister of Culture is the competent authority for our institution, the memorial in Terezin. I also welcome Mr. Tomáš Rieger, Councillor of the region of Ústí and also our long-standing colleague. Then also welcome to René Tomášek, Mayor of Terezin. Mr. Lukáš Vinš, Deputy Mayor of Litoměřice. Mr. Petr Papoušek, the President of the Federation of Jewish Communities in the Czech Republic. I also want to welcome Mr. František Banaj, the president of the Prague Jewish community. Also Mr. David Peter, Chief Rabbi of Prague. And then I also welcome the representatives of the Jewish Museum in Prague, the Foundation for Holocaust Victims, and the Museum of the Slovak National Uprising in Banská Bystrica. I also welcome the Ambassador of Israel, Germany, and the representative of the Embassy of the US in the Czech Republic. And last but not least, welcome to my colleagues from the Memorial of Terezin. Now, I would like to invite Jiří and Dominika Hoškovi and their children. Mr. Hošek is the son and Dominika is the granddaughter of Helga Hošková, and they will perform with the grandchildren of Helga Hošková, a former prisoner of the ghetto who's here with us today. The floor is yours.
thank you for this beautiful performance of Hošek family and the children who sang the Terezin anthem. If we speak about the former prisoners of Terezin ghetto, we mustn't forget two associations. One of them is the Terezin initiative, and the second is Beit Terezin in Israel, in Kibbutz Ibachai Yichud. Now, please allow me to give the floor to Mr. Michal Stransky, the director of the Terezin initiative. Mr. Stransky, you have the floor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. As you may see, I am a young boy. I am just a young boy because, fortunately, I was born after the war, and I do not have first-hand experience as some of you do. I am one of the so-called second generation of Terezin initiative. That means an association of former prisoners of Terezin ghetto and other concentration camps, and as well as their descendants. We are slowly coming to a point which was predicted, or at least anticipated by some. That means a generational renewal. There would be a time where there will be more sons and daughters of those who experienced the Shoah themselves. And it seems that this time has come. Nowadays, there are more members of the second generation in the advisory board of our association. Some time ago, some people mocked us that by saying that we are just wreath layers. Laying wreaths and flowers is not the only thing we do in our association. However, it is of utmost importance. It brings a symbolism. Who else than the second or maybe further generations will remember those who left to Lodz and Terezin to arrive to concentration camps, and they had never come back from this journey. I have had the pleasure to work in the Terezin initiative for more than a quarter of a century, and I do this because of my respect to my parents and other family members who I've had never met, and to remember them. And also, I do this because the tragic story of Jews should never be forgotten, but maybe it will be forgotten. But I hope that this will not be soon. And on occasions, as is today's occasion, living contemporaries should talk. I am not one of those. However, I will read some of my memories, or some of the memories of my father. And I'm very happy that he kept these memories for my brother, for me, and for our children. So I will read some of the excerpts of his memories. In December 1941, I was assigned to the transport to Terezin. It was the second transport, the so-called Aufbaukommando 2, in which there were 1,000 young men. A week earlier, the first transport had already left with 342 men. A few days before Aufbaukommando 2 left for Theresienstadt, we spent in the trade fair palace, where we slept on straw mattresses on the cold concrete floor. A representative of the Jewish community came to us and said, The 1,342 of those of you who left a week ago, you are the pioneers who are the first to leave your home. Your task will be to turn Terezin into a ghetto for Jews from both the Protectorate and the rest of Europe. After I had been in Terezin for a few days, a wagon loaded with sacks of flour arrived at the barracks where I was staying. An SS officer also arrived with this wagon. He had a short horsewhip in his hand. When I tell tourists about this in Terezin, I always say that there are a number of teaching methods. One such method, which is unpleasant but at the same time effective, is the whip method. Foodstuff was stored on the first floor. We each put a 50-kilogram sack of flour on our shoulders. None of us had that much weight on our shoulders before. We had to go up the stairs to the first floor. The officer made us run up those stairs, and he used a whip. You learn very quickly when someone's using a whip on you. We learned very quickly to put the bag in the right place with a certain jerk of the arm. We learned all this by the whip method. Another story that stuck in my mind took place at the beginning of 1942. 16 prisoners were trying to send letters to their relatives or families in Prague. Among them, a 32-year-old doctor from Prague, Dr. Jaroslav Stransky. The name Stransky is a relatively common Czech surname. At that time, there were 5 of us in Terezin with that name. One day, the SS gathered all the men of that name in front of the gallows by the moat. They ordered that the one who had sent the letter, despite the prohibition, confess. If the offender does not confess, we would all be hanged. The culprit, Dr. Jaroslav Stransky, confessed. The rest of us were led back into the ghetto. The executioner, called Fischer, was to become the so-called capo at Birkenau. He was a very sadistic and cruel man. They say he volunteered to carry out the execution. Although he carried out this execution in Terezin, Fischer was one of those who perished in the gas chamber in Birkenau on the night of 8 March 1944. I never mentioned this tragic event which I witnessed to my wife. I cannot explain why other less drastic experiences haunt me in my nightmares and not this horrible event. We had a Jewish wedding in Terezin. A civil wedding was not possible. I was included in the transport that took place in December 1943. Only the closest relatives could volunteer with those assigned to the transport heading towards the east. So we got married, and my wife and her mother accompanied me voluntarily to Auschwitz. However, back then, we did not know that the destination was Auschwitz, and we had no idea that it was the largest extermination camp. We spent our wedding night in a so-called Schloiska, along with 2,500 people waiting to leave. We sat on suitcases, holding hands and hugging for a while, and across from us sat our friend Bolda, who was my best man at the wedding. He read aloud the parts of the good soldier's shriek that describe the departure to the front. Many authors give many different descriptions of a wedding night, ranging from the ultimate experience of the physical and mental fusion of two loving beings to the source of a lifelong trauma. I cannot help but smile and laugh at the ignorance and naivety of the authors. I know from my personal experience that there is no such thing as a wedding night. Thank you for the attention, and hopefully our next meeting will be held without face masks. Thank you, Mr. Stransky, for your impressive speech with memories of his father. Ghetto Terezin is represented, and I'm very glad that he could come here in person despite the situation with coronavirus. Ghetto Terezin is represented by Hošek. So now I would like to give him the floor for his speech.
Madam Ambassador, Madam Secretary of the United States, Minister, Mayor, Chief Rabbi, survivors of Ghetto Terezin, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. This is just the second time I'm visiting Terezin. The first time was some 20 years ago with my mother, my wife, and two sons.
Vážená paní velvyslankyně, vážený pane šéfe americké ambasády, přeživší terezínského geta, pane ministře, starosto, vážení hosté, dámy a pánové. Terezíně se nebudu. Poprvé jsem se Terezíně navštívil před 20 lety se svou matkou, ženou a Hemesem.
The truth is, though, that in some manner I was born with Terezin as an integral part of my life. Both my late parents spent many months here. My mother, Aliza Sheikh Erman, stayed until the liberation of the ghetto. My father, Zeev Sheikh, went on to several camps until he was finally liberated in extremis in Calgary.
Pravdou však je, že Terezín byl neodmyslitelnou součástí už od mého narození. Oba mý dnes již zesnulí rodiče zde strávili mnoho měsíců. Má matka, Aliza Sheikh Erman, zde zůstala až do osvobození tábora a můj otec, Zeev Sheikh, z Terezína prošel dále další řadou táborů, než byl konečně také osvobozen v posledních chvílích života, a to tábor na Calgary.
They both spoke about their experiences. Terezin was never a taboo topic, as often occurred in families of survivors. Of course, they probably didn't tell us everything about what had happened to them during the war, but they were open about it and grateful that in the end they were alive and able to realize their dream to emigrate to Palestine and take part in the establishment of the State of Israel. They survived, and so did their love of life.
Oba mi ale o svých zkušenostech a zážitcích z války vyprávěli. Terezín u nás nikdy nebyl tabu, jak to možná bylo v jiných rodinách přeživších. Samozřejmě nám nejspíš neřekli vše, čím si ve válce prošli, ale byli o tom zcela otevření. Byli také vděční za to, že z války vyvázli živí a že si mohli splnit svůj sen, tedy emigrovat do Palestiny a účastnit se založení státu Izrael. Přežili a přežila taky jejich láska, kterou chovali v životě.
My father was obsessed with documenting what was happening in the ghetto, as if he anticipated that the Nazis would attempt to cover up and that the world would refuse to believe the atrocities. He collected every scrap of information, and when he was sent on a transport, he tasked my mother, a young girl of 17 at the time, to carry on. She did that and more. She kept a diary, which recorded the last months of the ghetto in prose that was both factually credible and emotionally touching. As a talented artist, she also drew and painted. In the last few years, we published his diary and her artwork in Hebrew and German, and hope to do so in other languages. We believe it is a valuable tool for both remembrance and education.
Můj otec byl posedlý tím dokumentovat vše, co se v ghettu dělo. Jako kdyby tušil, že se to budou poté nacisti snažit zakrýt a svět nebude chtít ani uvěřit tomu, že k takovým protestem někde mohlo docházet. Sbíral sebe menší útržky informací a když byl poslán na transport, tak požádal mou matku, které tehdy bylo pouhých 17 let, aby v jeho úkolu pokračoval. Ona mu vyhověla a udělala ještě mnohem víc. Sepsala deník, ve kterém zaznamenala poslední měsíce terezinského ghetta. Sepsala jej v próze, která je jak fakticky podložená, tak velmi dojímavá. Matka byla také talentovanou umělkyní a takže tak kreslila, malovala. A my jsme v posledních letech zveřejnili jak její umělecká díla, tak jsme vydali i deník. Zatím v hebrejštině a němčině, ale doufám, že bude být přeložený do dalších jazyků. Myslíme si, že je to velmi cenný nástroj, jak si tuto minulost připomínat a vzdělávat budoucí generace.
After the war, they continued to collect documents and to transfer them to safe hands in Israel and here. Much of the documentation about Terezin was salvaged thanks to them.
Dokumenty však sbírali i po válce a poslali je do dobrých rukou na bezpečná místa v Izraeli a zde do Terezína. Většinu dokumentů o terezínském ghettu se podařilo uchovat právě díky nim.
It is no surprise then that they were among the initiators and founders of Ghetto Terezin, the memorial of the Theresienstadt ghetto located in Kibbutz Givat Chaim in central Israel.
Není proto překvapivé, že oni byli z jedním z iniciátorů iniciativy Ghetto Terezin, což je památník, který se nachází v Izraeli v Středozemí, konkrétně v obci Kibbutz Givat Chaim.
They did not wish it to be just an archive and a lifeless monument. They wanted the place to be alive, to reproduce the unique belief of the inmates of Ghetto Terezin that the human spirit can survive even under the most extreme physical hardship.
Chtěli, aby památník nebyl jen struným místem archivy a monumentem. Chtěli, aby to bylo místo živé, aby se zde pořádaly akce, které by šířily jedinečné přesvědčení, které sdílí všichni přeživší Terezína. A to je to, že duch lidství může přežít i v těch nejextrémnějších podmínkách fyzického strádání.
And that is precisely what it has become. A place of remembrance, of course, but also a place of learning, of creativity and beauty.
A přesně tím se izraelský památník stal. Je to samozřejmě místo vzpomínek, ale také místo učení, kreativity a krásy.
It is now our task, the second and third generations of the survivors, who are no longer with us to testify firsthand, to find ways to tell the unique story of Terezin to future generations. I am looking forward to doing this in collaboration with all of you. Thank you.
A úkol je teď tedy na našich bedrech, na nás, druhé, třetí generaci potomků těch, kteří o své zkušenosti již nemohou promlouvat osobně. Naším úkolem je najít způsoby, jak tento jedinečný příběh zprostředkovávat budoucím generacím. A já se těším, že na tomto úkolu budeme spolupracovat všichni společně. Děkuji za pozornost.
Thank you. Terezin Memorial is an association falling under the Ministry of Culture of the Czech Republic. So now I would like to invite the representative of Ministry of Culture, the Vice Minister of Culture, Mr. Vlastislav Ouroda. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, allow me to transfer warm greetings of the Minister of Culture, Mr. Zaorálek, and I'm very happy to have the privilege to greet him on his behalf and with his words. Holocaust is one of the experiences where the individual is ultimately condemned to silence. Even the best possible answer seems trivial. These are the words of Israeli author Aaron Appelfeld. It is hard to talk about this even today. There are some attempts to subdue or eliminate a nation or ethnic group. However, the Nazi system was so atrocious that the experience is very difficult to transfer. That's why we hear that the atrocities of Terezin Ghetto are trivialized sometimes. No, it was not a privileged space. The truth is that the inhabitants tried to live here as they could. And the Nazis had to come to terms with the fact that there was theater, new different books were created or other pieces of art, for example, Brundibar, which we hear later. But let us not fool ourselves. One of the proofs that show what a dark and bleak place the ghetto once was is the fact that the Nazis were able to place up to 60,000 people here in former military quarters where no more than 7,000 soldiers used to live. The prisoners here died of diseases and the conditions here. In September 1942, on average, 127 people died. Moreover, just a few meters from the ghetto to the small fortress, which used to be a prison of Gestapo, and also people were deported to Auschwitz. To live in Terezin was meant to live on the edge between life and death. Eva Rubičková, one of the survivors, said that there were rumors on different incredible things, both pessimistic or optimistic, and nobody knew what to believe. It is strange, but even today, after 80 years, we seldom know what to believe and what not to believe. What is truth, what is a lie, what is information, what is misinformation. Social media make our lives quicker, and this is where those who distort our past and future often thrive. This starts by denying the Holocaust or the oppression. Now you can hear only comments on measures taken to fight COVID. Sometimes people who only think of themselves, who are egotists, criticize these measures, and they have no ideas about the hardship of other citizens that had to suffer in concentration, internation, or work camps. On the other hand, those who lived there became the beacons of humanism. Terezin Ghetto, for me, has always been a symbol of will to live and to fight with the destiny. And even the victims bring a deep sense, deep meaning. On the one hand, we have this effort to exterminate some groups of people, but on the other hand, we see this never yielding effort to persevere and give testimonies, and we should listen to them. We should be cautious when we listen to those who trivialize their suffering, because a weakened society is twice as much vulnerable. I want to give my respect to the survivors and my thanks for their testimonies. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your beautiful speech, Vice Minister. And now we will conclude the first part of speeches with the Mayor of Terezin, Mr. René Tomášek. Mayor, the floor is yours. Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, distinguished guests. Let me welcome all of you to our town of Terezin. Terezin is for many of you just another town, but for those survivors, Terezin will always be source of sad memories. 80 years ago, people arrived in Terezin with different expectations. Unfortunately, they bear with them this sad memory of the history of this place. 80 years ago, Terezin was established. And just like yesterday, weather was nice and then it deteriorated and it was sad and full of sadness, just like today. I'd like to wish us that we will always live in nice weather conditions and in nice times, and that we should forget for once and all about all this sadness that should never be repeated. Thank you for your kind words, Mayor. I thank you also for being our partner. Ladies and gentlemen, now we'd like to share with you a film by Miloš Zvěřina called The Shadows of Theresienstadt. Miloš Zvěřina is a screenwriter, director, and dramaturgist working at the Czech television. He studied animation at the Film and TV Academy in Prague, and he also was born in Terezin. So the topic of Terezin is strongly emphasized in his work. Mr. Zvěřina really cares about all of his projects with many emotions. I'd like to mention some of his works: Dreams Behind Bar, Helga L520, and many more. Now enjoy the film. And the film is not going to be translated into English.
Co je to za město? To je Terezín. Terezín? To je... Jak bylo celé město vězený? I pro děti? Už dávno ne. To bylo za války. Pojď, budeme si hrát. Já se bojím. Jirnako, pojď sem. Miloši, co tam děláš? Něco jsem našel. Kufr, tak ho dám dolů.
Marie Neštaj, Hanuš Jan Veliký, Stella Štajn, Zdeněk Končík, Dita Polák, Rafael Soň, Eva Levito, Dominika, Eva Hermanov, Hermanov Anko, Helga Lajsová, Marta Vašek, Evelina Landová, Josef Bauer,
Ukáž, pojď.
Hans Krásný, Lea Pol,
Kam jel ten vlak? A ti, co v něm jeli, vrátí se domů? Musíme na ně vzpomínat a pak tu s námi budou, říkal tatínek.
Líza Šlezinová, Margit Kodecová, Robert Bond, Marika Friedmanová, Marlena Lémová, Ruth Hajnová, František Broza, Mary Silvínová, Eva Bentemicová, Petr Hlema, Sonia Bačková, Doris Kajsová, Lenka Lindková, Hanuš Fischer, Helga Polacká, Julie Obuláková, Kitty Brundibar, Josef Kraus, Greta Hofmannsová, Erika Tausigová, Helena Marová, Marie Fantová, Vera Kohnová, Eva Balčník-Žíková, Erika Kandová-Fejlová, Josef Novák, Hanna Hagenová, Eva Kolensová, Gerta Adler, Hanna Linz, Karel Sack, Irena Gartens, Eva Šulcová, Hanna Winkelová, Doris Stefanová, Lidová Danková, Otto Hanušek, Zuzana Cajšeková, Ruth Čechová, Milena Grina, Aleš Šimek, Ruth Klauba.
A nyní mi již dovolte, abych předal slovo těm,
Floor now to
kvůli nímž jsme se
those
zde sešli
for whom
zejména.
we've gathered here today,
Jsou jimi přeživší Getta
the
Terezin,
survivors of the Terezin
přeživší
ghetto,
všech těchto hrůz, v nich jsem slyšel doma z
those who
vyprávění,
survived
které
all
se
of the
odehrály přímo
atrocities
zde v Terezíně, či v
which
dalších
took place
koncentračních
here in
a
Terezin and
vyhazovacích
in
táborech
other
na východě.
concentration and
Tyto
extermination
odvážní
camps.
lidé, kteří zde sedí mezi námi,
These
jsou těchto
courageous
tragických událostí
survivors
přímými svědky,
are here with us, and they have first-hand experience with
které jsme
the
se
tragic
snažili
events.
zarámovat
Let us now
dvou
listen
událostí.
to their memories.
Jak
They
se
will
dnes
reminisce about the
s osudem
past,
tolika
about
let
two main
dívají
questions:
na svoji zkušenost s
how
období
they
Shoah
perceive their experience with the Shoah
nakolik tyto hrůzy
with the benefit of
ovlivnily
hindsight
jejich
now,
pozdější život.
and how much their lives
A zdali se
were
někdy
shaped
ve svých
by this
myšlenkách
experience,
zabývají tím,
and whether
jak by
sometimes
vypadal
they
jejich život
wonder
bez této
what
zkušenosti.
their lives would have been like
První
if they
část
hadn't
nám
been
promluví
in
přímo
Terezin.
ze sálu paní
We have here with us Miss Michaela Vidláková and Helga Hošková. We will listen to their stories, and then we will listen to video recordings of two more survivors, Mr. Mordechai Liviny, former Max Lieben, and Ms. Dita Krausová. Dear
že historie začíná
guests,
tehdy, až
it is
poslední
said
pamětníci té
that
doby odejdou.
history
Ještě tu jsme,
starts
pamětníci Shoah.
and disappears with survivors and contemporary witnesses. We are still here, and we still witnessed some historians denying what happened. We witness also attempts at distorting the realities according to the convictions of some historians. And it is difficult to convince them about truth. But you gathered here to remember the first deportation 80 years ago, and I do not have to convince you about anything. I do not have to remind you of what happened, because you will not forget ever. So I will focus in my speech on the two questions that the organizers asked me. And I hope that there will be more to share our message with future generations after we are gone. So the first question, what is my perception of my experience with the Shoah? Today, it's 79 years. It's many years ago that I started the transport. I was a little girl. I was 6 years old. And my perception is twofold. It's an immense tragedy on the one hand, on my personal level, but also a tragedy because of my family, my friends. And also it's tragedy for the Jewish community. The centenary European culture and tradition philosophy, which was virtually lost. It's also a huge tragedy for the whole mankind. So many thwart talents, scientists, artists, inventors, thinkers, not that just those who were killed, but also those who had never been born. We're talking about the so-called tragedy or murder of future generations. Nothing can make up for such a loss. On the other hand, personally, when I take it down on my personal level, my perception is sometimes also positive, because I didn't go through all the horrors of Auschwitz, and both of my parents survived. So the fact that I went through this period brought me also some positive things. It shaped me enormously. I learned so much. I established my own set of values and priorities. I owe much of this to my parents. They didn't panic. They explained me many things, and they got me prepared. Because themselves were brought up in the spirit of the Boy Scouts movement and Zionism, and then passed on these values on myself. So let me tell you what specifically I learned. When Jewish measures were getting stricter and stricter, we were having less resources and less rights, but still we managed to adapt. We managed to tighten our belts, and we managed to survive and go on living, as far as lives were not at stake back then. So we managed to live with less food, we managed to share housing, just one apartment with many families. When my father had to work manually, he worked manually, and he actually saved our lives. Then I remember about packing for the transport. That was a challenge. One had to choose just the needed things, one had to anticipate, and one had to prepare the most important things to have them within the reach. One had to be really prudent and foresighted. And I remember that not everybody could anticipate. I remember that my father packed seeds of vegetables, carrots, and horseradish. He said that it was small, it weighed nothing, and he imagined that he could grow his own horseradish in Terezin, and then it could be good for our health. I also remember that when packing, he opted for a manual battery with the dynamo because he realized that there won't be any normal batteries in Terezin. These are small things which I remember every time when I myself till today get prepared for anything. My parents also packed my own luggage, my all small backpack, to be able to be on my own if we were to be separated. Then I remember when I arrived to Terezin for the first time I was on my own. I was 6 years old. But I learned to live in groups. I learned to stop whimpering. I learned to bear my own responsibility. For example, we had to do the cleaning. If it was not done properly, our whole room would be punished, so we very quickly learned to assume responsibilities for the others too. I also learned the sense of belonging, the need to belong to a group, to a collective, and I also sensed the value of friendship. But most importantly, I learned that if you want to have friends, you have to be a good friend yourself. You have to be supportive in order to receive support. In Terezin, quite often we had to supplement the unachievable things with anything that was available, so we excelled in improvisation. Imagine now that you would receive a letter and that you needed to pass on this letter to your mother, who was hospitalized in an infections ward. How could you do it? Not to contaminate yourself and not to contaminate the others. Well, you would take the letter and you would iron it with an iron. The same went for me when I contracted typhus. I had to take medication, but then when there was no medication, I received just some oatmeal which was available. All the doctors in Terezin were incredibly flexible, and they sometimes decided to sacrifice their own lives in order to save children in Osvětim, in Auschwitz and in Terezin. There was one more thing which I understood very quickly, that I should never succumb to fear, that I should try and act, because I realized that the slightest details can decide about whether you survive or not. In the autumn of 1944, my father was sent to the transport. The night before, it was incredibly windy, and one of the houses here was destroyed. My father, fortunately, was called by the leaders of the reconstruction works to join them and fix the destroyed building. My father volunteered. He volunteered to go and work fixing the house. The others thought that he was crazy because he should rather relax. But he opted for toil, for hard work. He said, however, that it was necessary also in order to save the ones that were responsible for the destruction of the building, because he was a good friend. And what happened was that while fixing the house, the last transport left Terezin. My father was not there, and it was the very last transport to Auschwitz. So it was again a huge lesson that I learned. Be able to anticipate, to be prudent, and to be a good friend. That's why me, my mother, and my father survived. When I was a child, I understood the enormous value of hope. Hope which we all were drawing from this magic spell when the war's over. And now about how this experience shaped my life. I will focus on my everyday life now, because in my everyday life I still realize that you can live with very little. Till today I do not waste things. I value every food I eat and everything that I have. I try to use them as long as I can and to mend them if necessary. I can anticipate different scenarios. I weigh possible good and bad scenarios, and I try to be as ready as I can at all times. I appreciate my family, my friends, my sense of belonging. It's my need. My need is to belong to some groups, but also I do need to feel that I'm helpful. I manage to be optimistic. I maintain humor. I maintain my ability to find joy in the little things. And always look at the bright side. Just as in Terezin. Even though we were living in the coldest places, we found some advantages because there were no fleas. I deeply appreciate freedom, human rights, and peace. And the fact that I survive makes me feel committed to constantly striving for not let people forget and make sure that similar things never ever happen again. Thank you.
I'm one of the youngest and last survivors from among the children of Terezin. And after the war, I asked myself, why did I survive? Why did I survive? Somebody had to survive in order to give testimonies. I arrived to Terezin in one of the first transports on the 10th of December 1941. That means a month after my 12th birthday. In my 50-kilo luggage, I had colored pencils and watercolors, and my father said me in that time, paint what you see. I spent almost 3 years in Terezin, and I painted over 100 pictures depicting the everyday life in the ghetto. It was prohibited to take photographs, so there are only a few photographs of Terezin. Even the adult painters did the same, and they tried to transfer the pictures from outside from the ghetto. The adult painters were accused of lying propaganda, and they paid with their lives. In the girls' house, L4110, where I used to live, nobody would search for my paintings there. And in autumn 1944, I was deported to the east, and I left the paintings here. I gave them to my uncle, who hid them in a wall and saved them. They were published later in Germany with Czech, German, and English text descriptions under the name of Zeichne, was du siehst, paint what you see. And these are one of the most published diaries or publications relating to Holocaust. I were in Terezin, in Auschwitz, in work camp in Freiberg. And I was freed when I was in Mauthausen. I was freed by the American army. After the war, I came back to Prague with my mother. Our father did not survive. I caught up on school, and then I studied at the Academy of Fine Arts. And I transferred my feelings from the Holocaust and the war in my work, and I made the viewer reflect. The paintings and other pieces of art survive when longer than their authors, and they will talk when I am no longer here. Back then, nobody talked about the Holocaust. Nobody was interested in it. Later, soi-disant historians maintained that nothing had happened, that we had thought this up, and we could not be silent no more. So we started to give lectures and debates with students. When I talk about them, I see these events before my eyes. It always unsettles and tires me. My son always tries to stop me. He says, "Are you going to the transport again?" I never watch war movies. And I'm watching news on the TV with anxiety and horror. I see homicides, attentates, suffering, abandoned, hungry children. And in these times, I recall a poem of my father, which he wrote in my diary. And this poem was saying, "Good days will come as bad ones once came, in this world so haunted and inhumane. But let's make a promise between you and me that human we will never cease to be."
probably they lived there very much longer. I went through the Holocaust at age about 13 to 20 and came to Israel after the Second World War in 1949. Since then I am living in the north of Israel and worked for all these years, practically 60 years, in technical professions, most of the time in high-tech as a mechanical designer. After we came to Israel, I was already married in Czechoslovakia. A few of us, former prisoners at Ghetto Terezin met, and we decided that it would be a pity to just leave that past behind us, because we all had spent there a few years with quite good relations between us. So we decided to meet here. Ghetto Terezin was chosen because it's in the middle of the country and it was most easy for everybody to get here. Also, there were a number of our friends living here in the kibbutz, and today we convinced the kibbutz to enable us to erect here this center. It wasn't in the beginning. In the beginning it wasn't meant to be a museum. It was just some kind of social circle meeting about once a year. Later it developed into a kind of educational and museal institution. When we founded Ghetto Terezin, none of us thought that it would be such a relatively well-developed museum and officially accredited as such. We thought it would be rather a center for us, the survivors, and also for the kibbutz as a kind of center for remembering Theresienstadt, but we didn't think of outreaching to other publics. Nobody is a prophet. None of us would have thought about what the Theresienstadt would be 50 years later. In any case, what it developed into is most certainly in the spirit of all of us who started it, because it's doing the job. We actually wanted to be done, to not forget Theresienstadt and to leave some kind of a footprint for future generations. It's a very difficult thing to try to promote or to preserve the memory of those years in the Holocaust. But since I know that even today the memory of the very old hard times of the Jewish people is preserved, like the Spanish Inquisition, not to speak of the fall of the Temple in Jerusalem. So there is actually, I would say, we do have to preserve the memory of the Holocaust, because it was the greatest and on a scale never before seen anywhere of catastrophe that befell the Jewish people. 6 million, that never happened before, not to Jews and not to anybody else. So there is absolutely some kind of necessity to preserve the memory of them. especially since otherwise it will just drown in the history of mankind, which it shouldn't. Looking back at my personal experiences in Holocaust, first of all, I am amazed. I'm amazed that I survived, because I survived very, very hard times in a number of concentration camps where most of the people around me did not survive. And I am some kind of outstanding person. I don't know why. I am not especially clever, I am not especially strong, and I survived all kinds of things, from diseases and epidemics, and not to speak of selections at Auschwitz, and I'm still here after 95 years. So I don't know, I don't believe in any higher power that saved me. It is just a lottery, it's luck, a thing of luck. I believe that the Holocaust made me think of the important things in life. Important things in life is love. Important thing in life is having some kind of direction to try for a better future. Our children and our grandchildren and the generations to come. Though I am not very optimistic that this lesson really is being learned, since in the last decades we witnessed all kinds of development in various parts of the world. So I'm not sure that humanity has learned much, but there is no other way. The only way to get to some kind of better life is to try to remember and to tell the story to the next generation. So maybe they will not do all the mistakes the generations of my parents, of my grandparents did. I grew up in a family things were very, very fixed. I was quite sure since a very young age that I would study to be an engineer in electronics, or electronics didn't exist at the time, but electrotechnique. And the normal way would have been, of course, to stay in Prague. Nobody thought of emigrating at the time. The family was not Zionist. And just to build my life there in that direction. Nobody thought of emigrating or starting any other life than what was very stable at the time.
Dita, from today's point of view, after many years of life, how do you perceive your experience during the Holocaust, during World War II?
The Holocaust is a constant presence in my life. With the distance, from today's point of view, it is even more how should I put it? Even stranger, even more unbelievable and unexplicable than when I was young. When I was deported to Terezin at the age of 13, everybody else was deported too, all my friends and all my family. And it was not something, it was something that belonged to life. But from a distance now, it's a break in my life. It is like there was a stop of the life from till the deportation, and quite another life when I returned from the war, from the camps. It's still an experience that it cannot be overcome. It is much too dominant. It dominates the life, I think, of most of the survivors.
How does it affect your life? Do you ever ask yourself what your life would be like if you didn't go through it?
The truth is, I never asked myself how I would be, what life I would have if I had not been in the camps. But since you asked this question, I thought about it, and I wonder, I would most probably have gone to university to study. What would I study? I don't know. I didn't have any preference. I didn't have at the age of 13, I had no plans for the future. I didn't know what I will ever be or what I want to be. I probably would never have met Otto, my husband. And most probably I would never have emigrated to Israel. Had it been Czechoslovakia as it was until the occupation by Hitler, I think I would have spent my life in some academic profession. Who knows? I can't tell. But the influence of Otto on my life was great. It was a great influence. It was the decision to emigrate was his. I wasn't educated. I wasn't aware of Zionism at all until age 11, 12, already during the war. It was the first time I heard about Zionism, about Palestine, about Jews going to Palestine and building their land. It was very exciting, it was very attractive, but at home there was no mention about it. My parents were not Zionists, my parents were social democrats who believed in perhaps even Marxism, I don't know. No. But they were not bothered by their Jewishness. Jewishness was not a topic at all. My life was completely changed after the war, completely changed. Immigration, leaving Europe, coming to this country, building a new life here, joining the kibbutz, and becoming a pioneer. It was exciting, it was attractive. But we had no grandparents, we had no parents. My children had no uncles and aunts. And my son still thinks that everybody had a number on his arm because all our friends had this number, and he grew up knowing everybody with a number on their arm.
Rita, what is the most important in your view to pass on to future generations?
A message.
What is...
My message is always, when I speak to young people, When you have children, teach them not to hate. Hatred is behind everything, every evil in the world. It's the hatred of the other. This is my message. Teach tolerance, teach your children to be tolerant.
Děkuji přeživším z České republiky a z Izraele.
Thanks to the survivors from the Czech Republic,
paní Hoškové,
Mrs. Vidláková, Hošková, then from Israel, Dita Krausová and Mr. Livny. Thank you very much.
A na úplný závěr jsme si dnes pro vás
And to conclude our program today, we'd like to show you the children's opera Brundibar, performed by the this month's Children Radio Choir
budou potřebovat několik
under
minut na přípravu,
Miss and Mrs. Flag.
opera
Just give them a couple more seconds until they're ready, and then you can enjoy the opera, so just be patient for a while.
holky, kluci, tetky. Dejte sobě do trumpetky. Rohlíky jak půl měsíce, housky jako slunečnice, doleva jako celé slunce, propečené jak ze skoší. Štěkot mám v jedné muši, právě čerstvé na mou duši.
Od soboty až do pátku tenhle ten bezmluvný muzikant bez mluvy hraje až do omezení. A to přeci pro nic není.
vřískat.
Dám vás uličníci sebrat. Opovažte se mi žebrat. Ale páni mi neměli ani zdání. Ani muk a 1000 hromů. Alo, rychle běžte dolů. Ale páni mi neměli ani zdání. Mlč, koukej, jak jste v prachu.
Mají gatě plné strachu.
Zatrobena pimprla, kapit, já byl děti, táta, tak je to hezky zkrátka, tak jsou u nás kaprolata. A vy děti, učte tiště, tohle to je moje říše, tady vládne jako král, flaši nektář Brundibar. Tady každý zpívat musí, jak já tohle klikou točím, ať to jenom někdo zkusí, nekam po něm dolů skočí. Tady vládnu jako král, já, flaši nektář Brundibar. Už tu není ten svítěl. Už se stíny stínou blíž. Noc tu bude v okamžiku. Počkáme tu do svítání. Sedneme si na lavičku. Podrž se mě za ručičku. S Brundibarem to je jiná. Teď už chrápe. A křičíme, Přiložte své hlásky k dílu, hlas a hlas dá velkou sílu. Když půjdeme všichni spolu, vyhrajeme dětský vzor. Proti zlému diktátoru dáme světu pěkný vzor. Víme, rozumíme, v pravý čas se dostavíme.
Už jsem zase s muzikou tu holal lidi ze všech koutů. Pro pána i pro děvečku mám já píseň na dvorečku. Valčí pokud komstor kvapík, můj flašinek, to je chlapík v pouličním svém rajonu. Jediný jsem pánem tónu, mocnější než každý car. Já, flašinekář Brundibar.
Teď nám vyšel pravý čas, a děti kolem vás, různě mladý válka začíná. Koškou prstí otca sem, radše zvolej děti sem, porazíme toho z husina.
A my jenom prohrázu.
Nemáme strach, podívejte, děti už nám pomohou.
Prašivý starý čokle a ty kotě celé zmoklé. Přestaňte s tou končičinou, nech pozahraju vám vinou. Nestačí ty moje víka, tu máš teda si spalici. Jevaj, slavně kouzolíka, roztrhal mi nohavici.
Thank you.
Thank you for this beautiful performance by the Dismant Children Radio Choir and Mrs. and Mr. Flagre. Thank you. Thank you also to all of you for being here. This is the end of the first part of today's program. We will now together go to the barracks of Magdeburg for a friendly gathering. We also prepared on the premises of the former theater on the third floor a small buffet. If somebody does not know how to go to the barracks of Magdeburg, if you are here for the first time, if you get out of the museum, on your right you cross the square, and over there the barracks will be on your left. Thank you very much again for being here. Thank you for being here for the first part, and hope to meet you for the second part in the barracks. Just one short reminder. Our events, remembrance events, do not finish here. We will remember the transport to Lodz and Terezin with some more initiatives on the 23rd of November. We will organize the March of the Living. We will follow in the footsteps of the first prisoners of the first transport. The event will begin at 4 p.m. so you are all warmly invited, and I am looking forward to meeting you in the barracks. Thank you all.